Mr. Speaker, I just want to refer to David Garrett and his speech and just point out that he is a staunch advocate for this bill. He has pushed very strongly for it from the start. And I was thinking while he was speaking, Mr. Speaker, about why I feel so concerned about what he has to say. And really what it is, Mr. Speaker, is that we hear over and over again from the ACT Party and from the National Party that this three strikes bill is about the victims. But unfortunately what I hear when I listen is actually it's more about hatred for the offender than what it is compassion for the victim. And when that is the driver to legislation, then I think that we need to be concerned in this House, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago we had a judge from California here in New Zealand. His name was Judge Eugene Hyman. Now, that judge, Mr. Speaker, spoke to us about his concerns with regards to this bill. We asked him questions around rehabilitation in California, and he made it very clear that the money in California with regards to corrections was overwhelmingly invested in incarceration rather than rehabilitation of prisoners. And I think most New Zealanders would look to the US and think, well, actually, we don't see them as the model for us as a country, for us New Zealand as a country, to look at the US as the model to aspire to. I think most New Zealanders would think and say that ours is much better as a country as it stands, and the last thing we want to be doing is reflecting the legislation that they have in place over there, Mr. Speaker. We also had Reverend Ron Givens here recently, about 2 weeks ago, and Reverend Givens was the Executive Director of Prison Chaplains in California. He has first-hand experience of what happens when a three strikes bill is reactionary and draconian like this bill, and he spoke of the consequences of California's three strikes legislation upon which this bill is based. He talked about skyrocketing rates of incarceration, unjust sentences and unmanageable costs. And I do find it quite disconcerting that I took the time to listen to Mr. Garrett, even though I disagreed fundamentally with everything that he said, and he can't sit there quietly while I'm giving a speech that reflects my opinion and views on this bill, Mr. Speaker. Reverend Givens knows exactly what will happen if this bill is passed, and that is why he came to New Zealand, to warn us against it. And the government should have been listening, but instead the National Party, the national government, were already tied into a deal that they had made right at the beginning of their term as government, a deal that they had made with the ACT Party, despite the fact that fundamentally they disagree, hence why the Ministry of Justice and the Minister of Justice washed his hands of the bill, and still they know it's bad legislation, but they do it because it gave them the power in the House. And we look at them and we just think, that's incredibly sad and quite bad for New Zealand, actually, as the chair of the Law and Order Committee sits there laughing, Ms Sandra Gowdy, because she finds it impossible to take anything seriously. Now, Mr Chair, the Māori Party brought up an interesting point, and it is around the amount of money that goes into corrections, the amount of money that will have to go into the incarceration of prisoners, and quite frankly, most New Zealanders would agree that that isn't where they want their money to be spent. And yet we see under the national government more money being invested into corrections, and then on the other hand we see less money being invested into things that New Zealanders do agree are important, things like early childhood education. So more on incarceration, less in education. I think most New Zealanders would agree that that is a blight on the government with regards to their decision making and with regards to what they see as being priority for this country. Now, Mr. Chair, there were a number of concerns that arose as this piece of legislation was going through the Select Committee, and I want to talk to some of those. Now, on the 19th of January 2010, the National and the ACT parties announced a revised three strikes policy to be incorporated into the Sentencing and Parole Reform Bill. The Law and Order Committee met to consider the revised bill for the first time on the 10th of February, And despite the significance of the changes to this bill and the high level of public interest, the National Party and ACT Party members of the committee used their weight of their majority on the committee to ram through the following resolutions. First one being to prevent the Justice Ministry, the implementing authority for the bill, to have any role as advisors to the committee. Now, it's one thing that they were not the lead agency with regards to this piece of legislation, but it's another when the chair and all of the members from the National and ACT side actually vote to block any role that the Ministry of Justice might play with regards to advising on this legislation. The other thing they did was they held no further oral submissions on this bill, even though the substance of it had changed since submissions were last invited. And there's a recurring theme with regards to that. The recurring theme is the National Party's ongoing mission to block democracy, and that is what they've been doing since they've gotten into Parliament, since they've gotten into government. The other thing they did was they only allowed written submissions on the revised bill from those who had previously submitted on the specific clauses that had been amended. And it does make you wonder, what were they concerned about? Obviously they understood that overwhelmingly anyone that was going to make a submission on this would have submitted evidence that went against what they were trying to do, that it would have supported our side in what we were saying, and that this bill would not be effective in what they were trying to achieve. The other thing that it did was it gave those submitters 2 weeks or less notice to make further submissions. So a very small time frame. So the process right from the start was flawed, and that was something that we are concerned about. Now, the Labor members of the committee voted against each of these resolutions. We believe that this is an unnecessary rush process, and that to close submissions to all but those who have already submitted on specific clauses affected by the National Act 3 Strikes announcement is to deny the public its right to submit on the revised bill. The Select Committee process is one of the most important parts of our democracy, as it provides an opportunity for the voting public to have their say, an opportunity that was denied by National and ACT with regards to this legislation. Now, one of the themes of New Zealand today is the shift from all decisions being made on behalf of citizens in a representative democratic style to a participative democracy in which institutions and processes are open to public submission. The denial of the public access to submissions is a step backwards to a we know best, we are in charge and we make the decision attitude. And this is unfortunate, but that is what is happening. Now, the original Sentencing and Parole Reform Bill was in the name of the Justice Minister, Honourable Simon Power, and the Ministry of Justice was the lead advising agency. This made sense because the bill aims to change sentencing laws, which are clearly under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Justice through the courts. And without explanation, the revised bill was transferred into the name of the Police and Corrections Minister, Judith Collins, and the New Zealand Police were made lead advisors, with the Department of Corrections as assisting advisors. Now, we believe there are serious constitutional issues with this. There's always been a deliberate separation between the justice agencies such as the Justice Ministry, courts, the police and corrections. This is because it is considered constitutionally inappropriate for the same agency to undertake the roles of arresting offenders, trying and sentencing them and imprisoning them. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's a number of things that we're concerned about with regards to the process. We're concerned about also the substance of the bill. We've said over and over again, and so is the Minister of Justice, that this bill will go no way in regards as acting as a deterrent to crime. And although we've heard from that side time and time again that this brings about justice for victims, we've also seen, with regards to the evidence, that instead what we're going to see are victims dragged through the mud, even more so as people are more likely to appeal their cases, less likely to plead guilty, because of the fact that there is more at stake. Now, Mr Speaker, we disagree with this bill, and I say that as the chairperson of the Law and Order Committee continues to laugh and mouth funny things to me from the other side of the House because she cannot take this bill seriously, but we do, Mr
Sorry
Speaker.
to interrupt the member. Her time